Hello, I'm Juliet Antonio.
I'm Aaron Isaac.
And welcome to Where's the Director, because we'd like to have a word with them. And on today's episode, our fourth episode, we are talking about Tick, Tick, Boom. So as always, a little bit of background. Tick, Tick, Boom is a 2021 movie musical directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda with a script by Stephen Levinson and music and lyrics by Jonathan Larson. Based on the stage show of the same name, the film is semi-autobiographical, telling the story of Jonathan writing a musical to break into the theater industry in January of 1990, the week of his 30th birthday. Now here's a little bit more about Jonathan Larson the Man. This is by no means a comprehensive biography or analysis of his works, but if you're looking for a great book, I highly recommend Boho Days, The Wider Works of Jonathan Larson by Jake Hollis. Jonathan David Larson was born on February 4th, 1960 in White Plains, New York. He was exposed to the performing arts at an early age. For music, he played trumpet, tuba, piano, and sang in choir. For theater, he was a performer at White Plains High School and became an acting major at Adelphi University in Garden City, New York. It was while he was in school that he started composing. His musical influences were Elton John, The Beatles, The Who, The Doors, Billy Joel, and of course, Stephen Sondheim. After graduation, Jonathan moved to Lower Manhattan and worked as a waiter at the Moondance Diner on weekends for 9.5 years while composing during the week. His first major work was Superbia, originally a musical adaptation of 1984, which had to be rewritten after George Orwell denied permission. Despite winning a workshop, a concert, a Richard Rodgers Production Award, and development grant, the musical was never produced, and it still hasn't been as of this day. The second show was a concert called Tick, Tick, Boom, which performed off-Broadway in Greenwich Village and at Second Stage Theater. You can still find footage of Jonathan performing the show in full on YouTube. In 1989, Larson was suggested by Ira Weitzman of Playwrights Horizons to partner with playwright Billy Aronson to create a musical adaptation of Puccini's opera La Bohème. The show became Rent, a musical about artists living in Manhattan's East Village under the shadow of the AIDS crisis. On January 25, 1996, the day of Rent's first Broadway preview at the Nederlander Theater, Jonathan Larson died of an aortic aneurysm believed to have been caused by underlying Marfan syndrome. Jonathan had been having chest pains, dizziness, and shortness of breath a few days before and promised his friends he'd go to the hospital, but never did. Doctors concluded that if the aortic dissection had been properly diagnosed, he would have lived. He was 35 years old. The show went on, and the cast dedicated the show to Jonathan Larson as they continued to do every night during the course of Rent's 12-year run on Broadway. Yeah, it was awarded the Tony Awards for Best Musical, Best Book, and Best Score, and it is also one of the few musicals to have received the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. As for Tick, Tick, Boom, after Jonathan Larson's death, it was rewritten into a stage musical by David Auburn. It premiered off-Broadway in 2001, starring Lala Esparza, and Lin-Manuel Miranda saw the show in college, describing that moment as the bat signal. He also credits Rent as the reason why he started writing musicals, because it was the first contemporary piece he saw. He went on to play Jonathan in an encore's production of Tick, Tick, Boom in 2014. Producer Julie O saw his performance and approached him to direct the film, which he jumped on, even though Larson's parents were a bit hesitant on releasing the film rights. The film was announced in 2018, and the role of Jonathan was offered to the Amazing Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield, after Lynn saw him play prior in the West End revival of Angels in America. When Lynn asked a mutual friend if Andrew could sing, the friend lied and said yes, but Garfield took singing lessons and piano for the role. Now, a note about casting really quickly. The main cast includes Robin DeJesus as Michael, Alexandra Shipp as Susan, Vanessa Hudgens as Caressa, and Joshua Henry as Roger. The movie also features a slew of Broadway cameos, specifically in the Broadway Composers Workshop scene and in the Sunday Diner sequence. What Miranda wanted to do was have people that wrote or were in shows that inspired Jonathan Larson, people Jonathan knew who performed his work, and people who wrote or were in shows inspired by his work. So in the first category, we have Stephen Schwartz, the composer of Godspell, Cheetah Rivera, the original Anita in West Side Story, and Bernadette Peters, the original Dot in Sunday in the Park with George. She's the one who comes out of the diner and Andrew places his hands on his heart. In the second category, the bums outside the restaurant are played by original Rent cast members Adam Pascal, Daphne Rubin Vega, and Wilson Germain Heredia. And the neighbors Michelle and Gay in the Boho Day sequence were Jonathan's neighbors in real life. In the third category, we have Beth Malone from Fun Home, written by Janine Tesori, who also makes a cameo in the composer scene, and Philippa Sue and Renee Elise Goldsberry from Hamilton. So basically that whole movie was kind of like the Avengers Endgame portal scene, but for theater nerds. And that's just a small percentage of Broadway performers in this movie, but it shows attention to detail and casting alone. Filming began in March 2020 and was shut down after 8 days due to COVID-19. Production resumed in October and wrapped in November. Tick, Tick, Boom was given a limited release in theaters on November 12th, 2021, and then premiered on Netflix 1 week later. Critics praised the film, with playwright David Henry Hwang saying in his piece for Variety that the film is a heart-wrenching love letter to follow your dreams in spite of rejection. Audiences also loved it, and the film generated a lot of box office buzz, which was impressive, not just for a movie musical, but for a movie coming out during the pandemic. It currently has 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, and as of recording, Tick, Tick, Boom is nominated for all the major awards, and Andrew Garfield took home the Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actor in a Motion Picture Musical or Comedy. Along with West Side Story and In the Heights, Tick, Tick, Boom is already being hailed by musical theater fans as one of films ushering in another potential movie musical golden age. So with all that out of the way, Aaron, where do you want to start?
Well, first, I want to say I really like this film.
Yay!
I've talked to a few people who are not theater or musical nerds, nor do they traditionally like musicals even, but they really like the film.
Ooh.
Which I thought was interesting, and I think I had asked you off air your thoughts on like why it is that people seem to like this film even if they aren't really musical viewers. And I think the thing you said was that it had to do a lot with you can watch the film and steadily, like, you immediately get that it is a musical, but the musical is done really well. The music, the singing, and I knew that Andrew Garfield couldn't sing, but my God, in this movie, he must have trained his butt off because he can sing.
It shows.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's a lot of existentialist themes, but before I even get into that, I just wanted to say, like, you know, I hope Andrew Garfield wins an award of some kind for this movie because
He already got the Golden Globe, so that's a good sign.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Because as I'm watching the movie, as it opens up, I start thinking about, like, Andrew Garfield because I was most familiar with him through Spider-Man.
As were a lot of people in our generation, to be fair.
Yeah, but I will say there's a point in the movie where, although at the beginning I'm just thinking, oh, hey, that's Andrew Garfield. Oh, hey, he can sing. I didn't know that. But then there's this point in the movie, and it goes back to the namesake of the movie, Tick, Tick, where you start hearing the ticking.
In his head.
And beginning from there to the end, maybe this is just me. You can tell me if I'm looking too far into this.
Go ahead.
But the look on his face permanently just changed throughout the entire film because every time I saw him, it looked like he was like on the edge of like bursting out into tears.
Yeah.
You get that too?
I think it's also because in this movie and in real life, Jonathan Larson is very much a perfectionist. And I'm gonna, as he says at the beginning of the movie, even before we really get to the opening number, he feels so much pressure on himself because, as he says, he's about to turn 30, and Stephen Sondheim was 27 when he wrote West Side Story. And as he also points out, he was older than when Paul McCartney was writing songs with John Lennon. And so he feels that he has to be this success, and this movie is just him coming to terms with trying to get Superbia on Broadway, trying to get a workshop. And it's I'm just going to talk about the opening number a little bit since we're already getting there. So with the opening number, it's set at the one night only premiere of Tick, Tick, Boom. So we understand that this will be the framing device Jonathan will use to tell his story. And as we said, we established that he hears this ticking in his head as something comes closer, some deadline, which is eerie if you know that he's going to die a few years later. And he also sets up what's causing him to hear this noise. He wants to be a successful musical theater composer, and he's comparing himself to the people who inspire him. And he already feels his own mortality as he sees his friends age around him and as he sees his friends die around him, which is a lot to process for someone in their late 20s. And it's an existential crisis I personally see a lot with people of my generation, especially in the age of social media, where people often post the perfect moments of their life and make others feel wretchedly inadequate when in reality we're all doing about the same. And with the Peter Pan and Wizard of Oz references in this number, you can tell Jonathan is also at the moment in his life where most 20-somethings don't want to grow up fully because it's so scary to try to follow your dream while also trying to support yourself and pay bills at the same time, especially if you live in a city that's as expensive as New York. And it's also scary because he doesn't recognize the people he loves when he gets older. Michael's no longer a performer, he works in advertising, and Susan is a dancer who wants a more permanent job as a dance instructor. And as you were saying, he looks like he's going to burst into tears, so of course he wants to lay down and cry, as he says in the song, because he feels he hasn't accomplished anything worthwhile, and he feels himself aging. Plus his 30th birthday is also significant. It's in the year 1990, which is a new decade, and he feels stuck. And so on the surface, if you don't know his time is limited, you wonder, why the hell is this guy writing a biomusical when he's so young? Think about it. But Lin-Manuel Miranda's theory was that he had so many ideas crammed into his head, he needed to get Tick, Tick, Boom out so his brain had the space to write Rent. But again, his fear that he needs to do something with his life and the way it's presented in the movie is oddly omniscient. Yeah. So I hope that answered your question, is about to why he's kind of, because he's dealing with a lot all at once, and in the film we're seeing it within the time frame of 1 week. Yeah.
Oh, that just hit me. Yeah, that is all within I thought it was spread out over a longer time period.
It's a week.
Wow, that's a week.
Yeah,
Jeez.
that is a week.
Wow. Okay. I don't know where to go from there.
That's okay.
So you mentioned kind of how he feels, then I'll use the term alienated, because he starts to see how his friend is changing, going into advertising, and he doesn't, and you see it in that scene where his friend, he says, hey, go to this advertising thing, you can earn a little bit of money for your musical.
Yeah.
And he goes there, and at first he's trying to get along. He's coming up with some good ideas. He's throwing them out there, here and there. And then he realizes why they're doing it. Do you want to tell us what the ad is for?
Sure. So Jonathan's best friend Michael works in an advertising firm, and he wants Jonathan to participate in kind of, I forget the term that they use, like a talk back group or a workshop. And he says, it'll help you make a few bucks. And he needs money to help find musicians for Playwright Horizon so he can pay for a full band, since Ira Weitzman won't do it, even though Jonathan points out, isn't your operating budget X amount of dollars per year? But I digress. So he goes in, and they want the people in the focus group, that's what it is, in the focus group, to come up with, when you hear the word America, what do you think? And Jonathan, of course, thinks imperialism, Vietnam, poverty, genocide. But he comes out with all of these beautiful images. And the reason Michael wanted him to do it was because he comes up with commercial jingles for fun. But as Jonathan says, it's not something he wants to do. He wants to write the great American musical in the age of Broadway. But they find out that he's really good at it, and he's starting to have fun. And he's like, I could get used to this. People want to hear my ideas. But then you see that it's for a fat substitute as like a cooking ingredient. And then you listen to all the side effects. Some of them including toxic shock syndrome. I think hair loss was thrown in there at one point. And he realizes they're using us to make this horrible product palpable to the general public. So he finally decides enough is enough. And he's like, all right, you want a name for your product? Here you go. Chubstitute. And you just see the light inside of everyone's eyes die.
Which, by the way, I thought, like, if you name something Substitute, yeah, no one would buy it, but that would be hilarious. I want that to happen. Not to buy it, I just want it to happen.
That would be hilarious.
It's a strangely funny but accurate.
Yeah, but when we're done with that scene, that leads to the first fight we see between Jonathan and Michael, where they're discussing his inappropriate behavior. And Michael starts to approach him, like, because Michael in the movie is a gay man, and he's saying, I could get in serious trouble for this. I recommended you. I worked hard for this job. Basically saying, I had to fight to be here, to be accepted. And he says to Jonathan, you know, you have a lot of things that I want. You have so many people who love you, and you take it for granted. You have all this he's like, I want that in my life. And when Jonathan says, well, what's stopping you? It really takes you aback. And Michael reminds him, there's an entire political party, there's Jesse Helms, and there's a country who won't let him get married or adopt children. But Jonathan still doesn't quite realize that the problems of his world, while they are problems, aren't as significant as when it comes to Michael and Susan. When it comes to Michael and Susan's problems, which we might get to later. But is there anything that you wanted to comment on with that, or?
No. Go on.
Yeah. So I think we should start with his relationship with Susan first and then get into Michael because it's more serious. So Susan is Jonathan's girlfriend who started out as a biology major and eventually fell in love with modern dance. She sustained an injury and she is offered a position to be a dance instructor in the Berkshires. And she says to Jonathan, I need to talk about this. And he keeps putting it off, partly because he is so focused on getting Superbia staged, but also because this is a conversation he wants to really avoid. And we start to see his thought process for this in the song Johnny Can't Decide. And Johnny sees he sees his life in extremes, which we discussed in our Les Mis episode with Javert. Tick, Tick, Boom is less severe when it comes to absolutes, but they're still there. Jonathan sees it either as you're a successful artist or you're not. You either commit yourself to art or give up and take a soulless corporate job instead. He does see the pros and cons of each side, but for him it has to be one or the other and not both. So when he's thinking about these compromises he might have to make for Susan in regards to her taking a job in the Berkshires in Western Mass, he doesn't know what to do because he doesn't know if he can bend his dreams at all. He doesn't know if he can bend them or adjust them. He doesn't want to make a decision. He wants to hide because as he sings, can he settle down and still not drown? And the irony is, he is able to convey these thoughts in an eloquent song, but he can't communicate these thoughts to his girlfriend or his best friend. It's because music is the best way for him to express himself that he can't do it the other way of having to sit down and have a tough conversation. And with the song, he isn't at a moment of transition yet, but he's approaching it and it scares the hell out of him, even though if you do know musical theater structure, there's always going to be that moment of transition that pushes the plot forward, and we need that to happen. So that's sort of the first thing. I don't know if you want to comment on that before I get to therapy.
It's interesting. I think I have a different interpretation about Larson's tackling with this choice. I didn't see it as a choice between absolutes. At least I didn't think he thought of it that way. I think it was more of being where he is gives him certain opportunities that he's not going to have if he moves in with Susan. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of reasons for this in the film. Like you see, like he doesn't drive. Everywhere he goes, he rides a bike.
Or takes public transportation.
Right, and you can imagine that if he moves, and I think the film said it was quite the distance.
Yeah, it's very far away from New York City.
Yeah, I do think that perhaps there is this opportunity loss in moving in with Susan. Mm-hmm. And so he's put in this position of, does he's made to make an impossible choice, really, I think, for him.
Yeah.
Does he stay with the woman he loves versus follow his dreams? Mm. And I got the sense that the reason he can't, it's not so much that he can't choose because he ends up choosing.
Yes.
He chooses his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of understood why it was so difficult. And I'm not saying you don't.
No, yeah. I get it, yeah.
But the reason it was so difficult, and this is a classic thing in existentialism about making choices, was that you can't figure this out by cost-benefit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't just weigh the pros and cons and go, oh, this one.
Yeah.
Rather, following your dreams to the fullest extent you can. And for Jonathan, it looked like, at least through the movie and a little bit through your description, that he had this compulsion to follow his dreams. It is a difficult choice because those two things, being with the one you love, following your dreams, those are on a par, as some philosophers say.
Yeah.
As in, there isn't a clear distinction in terms of value, which one you should or should not value more. You value them both equally, just differently. And one of the things that I think this movie does really well is talk about the suffering entailed in making that choice.
Yeah.
Because no matter what you choose, you lose something else. Right? As a practical matter, there are just some choices that are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Right? You, in this case, yeah, you follow your dreams or you follow the girl.
Yeah.
And he made his choice, and I think what existentialists like Kierkegaard would say is that suffering is the thing that makes you who you are. That to really create yourself, you have to suffer.
Yeah.
Or it's not that you have to suffer. It's more like to create yourself, suffering happens. In this movie, very much does not shy away from the idea of suffering.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting because there isn't a happy ending per se. It just ends. At the end of the film, Jonathan dies. And it's not like... you could say it's a celebration of his work and of his life.
Yeah, which is what Lin-Manuel Miranda wanted. Which
I think this film does.
Yeah.
But seen through the eyes of Jonathan, I think, the film ends kind of with him in a sad place. And that, having to make that choice, existentialists would say, it sucks.
Yeah.
But it, to be the person you want to be, you have to make the choice. The existentialists, I think, I haven't seen an exception to this, but they've always been very critical of
Yes.
of people who choose not to choose.
Yeah.
Right? So, they would be screaming at Jonathan during that whole conversation with Susan.
Therapy?
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, just before that.
Yeah.
They would be yelling at him like, okay, I know it's hard,
Come on.
but just get to it.
You have two roads. You gotta go down one of them.
And it sucks because tick, tick,
Tick,
tick.
tick, tick.
It's that, and this is great writing, I think, the way they set this up. That choice follows him throughout the entire movie.
Oh, yes, it does.
And it every second that he puts it off, or that he's working on the script, I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, this is just sitting in the back of your mind.
Oh, very much so.
You don't know what to do, so you're just typing to forget about it, and then Susan comes in, and then you can't deal with it, and he starts to break down.
Yeah.
And that leads into
to therapy. So in the original stage show, therapy is very much a comedic number, making fun of how sometimes couples will use language from therapy to get under each other's skin, and also still being able to stick it to their partner while having a smile painted on their face and maintaining a facade of politeness. So we still do see this comedic number in the concert where Jonathan and Caressa sing the song while mimicking the facial expressions and movements of ventriloquist dummies, showing some great physical acting too. But while this comedic scene is going on, we keep cutting back to the argument Jonathan and Susan are having in his apartment, because this is the climax of their relationship that will either be a turning point forward or will lead to a breakup. And it also shows another character trait about Jonathan where he fails to understand how his actions affect other people, such as by putting off this decision about Susan's job as long as possible, which we learn quickly and as we see is the wrong thing to do because it makes the argument way worse due to all the built-up tension. And he also fails to see how on some level his friends are facing the same feeling of limited time that he is for more dire reasons at this point in time. Because again, he doesn't know that he's going to die. So with Susan, she's a dancer who I said broke her ankle, which could have ended her dance career. And most professional dancers are on limited time anyways because depending on how much you push your body, most dancers retire around their 30s or 40s. And with this scene, a lot of truths are laid out in the open for Susan and Jonathan to see. And just when you think they're about to reconcile, Jonathan unconsciously ruins it, because as they embrace, he taps notes like he's sitting at a piano on Susan's back, and she realizes, oh my God, you're thinking about how you can turn this into a song, aren't you? It's at that moment where she realizes that when it comes to his art or her, the art's always going to come first. And this scene, it's going to remind me of a musical we're going to talk about at some point on the show, Sunday in the Park with George and Dot's relationship, where he loves her but can't express it, which is discussed early on in the movie when Jonathan and his friends watch Sunday in the Park with George on PBS, and it's like, why can't he just tell her he loves her? Showing not just how much of an influence Stephen Sondheim is on Jonathan's pieces, but also a theme with artists not being able to express themselves and their feelings to the detriment of their relationships. And then, when he finally writes the ballad for the lead woman in Superbia with "Come to Your Senses," it's sung by Caressa and Susan, and it's heartbreaking because it showed that Jonathan was listening to every single word Susan said, and this song helped him to see what was happening in the relationship from her point of view. And as he sits there and listens to this song, he wishes he could be that man who could lower his defenses and come alive out of love for her, but he can't. Not yet, and not in the way other people want him to. Yeah, which is pretty sobering. So now that we've talked about Jonathan and Susan, do you want to talk about Jonathan and Michael?
Sure. Yeah. I'll let you give a summary. You did a little bit about Michael being a gay man and the AIDS crisis at that time.
Yeah, so I'm going to... Yeah, so what happened... Jonathan and Michael are best friends, basically have known each other since childhood. And Michael used to be a performer, quit, went into advertising, as we've said. And then at one point, Jonathan finds out Superbia isn't getting produced. And he comes in and he's like, I'm on limited time. And Michael says, you have no idea about limited time. And he reveals to Jonathan in an emotional burst that he is HIV positive. And so here's a bit of context with the AIDS crisis in the year 1990. George H.W. Bush is president, and he sees AIDS as a punishment for moral deviance. ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, is still taking actions to change the definition of AIDS so more marginalized groups can have access to treatment. And they're targeting the NIH, the CDC, the HHS, and the Catholic Church. The HIV travel ban is still in effect. And Ryan White dies at age 18, with the Ryan White Act being authorized in August. And AIDS and HIV are still death sentences, HAART and cocktails, and the vaccine that we've heard about in the news recently, both of them are still a long way off at this point. And Jonathan, as he has said, he has seen too many of his friends die, and he has seen too many people praying over the bodies of their children. And so when Michael tells him this information, it's a culmination of everything hitting Jonathan all at once. His breakup with Susan, his friend in the hospital, no calls from producers regarding Superbia, and now Michael's HIV diagnosis. And so all Jonathan can do is turn to music to cope. And fun fact, this is the song in the movie that was performed live by Andrew Garfield on set. It wasn't previously recorded. And so he reminisces about the good times that he had with Michael, singing Disney songs at the Y and performing West Side Story in high school. And this part of the song always gets me emotional, and I cry every time because it reminds me of why I fell in love with theater in the first place. Because in my opinion, there was no greater feeling than going into the auditorium after school to play pretend and make art until dark and come out from the theater and looking into a starry night sky and then going out to eat with friends. And this song is also a moment of transition for Jonathan, where he makes a vow to keep composing because he doesn't owe it only to himself and his happiness, he owes it to his friends for all the memories they have together. And as Michael pointed out before, he said, you're just writing musical theater, you're not changing the world. And it's an issue that Jonathan struggles with because in the song Play Game, it's Jonathan Larson's I Am song for Broadway, and he gives the audience another reason as to what motivates him and another reason for his inner conflict, which is the current Broadway landscape. He sees Broadway as a business that puts on commercially successful shows that are totally devoid of life and don't take any risks. And he wants to create a piece of work that discusses topics that aren't portrayed on stage, pieces that are reflective and push boundaries and try something new. However, the inner conflict comes from realizing, even though it's all a rigged game, because the business is about who you know and how much money you have, it's still a game he needs to play in order to put his shows on stage and make money. And this is an argument that's still going on in the theater world, with the most common complaint from fans being a lack of original work, oversaturation of jukebox musicals based on pop songs or musicals that just adapt movies. Another good point this brings up is how art made by playwrights and composers of color are being stifled as a result. So as a theater fan, that song is disheartening to hear. But by the time we get to why, it's a moment of transition for Jonathan. And this time he's going to write about what he knows, because that's how he'll make a difference as a composer, writing about the people he loves in hopes of fostering change in his personal life and maybe in the world around him. So did any of the conflict with Michael make you think of anything in terms of existentialism?
Yeah, in terms of existentialism, when you get to the later writers, when I say later writers, I mean people coming out of World War II, going into the 50s and 60s. There's a bigger recognition among writers about social forces, and that dynamic of being stuck playing that game and being unable to make something meaningful really hits home for people like de Beauvoir, who herself, her own personal experience, you can imagine her being a woman during that time. People tell women what careers they can and can't have, and sometimes it can feel, when you're in that situation, it can feel like, your personal, for lack of a better term, spirit is being stifled.
It feels demeaning and demoralizing.
Right. I think there's a good quote that I grabbed that really drives the point home from de Beauvoir. She said, "There is no more obnoxious way to punish a man than to force him to perform acts which make no sense to him, as when one empties and fills the same ditch indefinitely." And she ends the quote by saying, "This mystification of useless effort is more intolerable than fatigue."
Ooh,
I know.
I like that. That's very good.
The existentialists, at this point, were good writers. You can't include Sartre in that, but de Beauvoir's good.
Oh, she's a very good writer.
No, it brings home the point. And I think this is the other reason why, and I mean, he talked about it, why Jonathan suffers so much in the production of his work, because he wants to do something meaningful.
Yeah.
And you see that in his interactions with the advertising workshop, the focus group.
Yes.
Where he realizes that everything he could have a pretty comfy life.
As you see in the song and dance number where they're in Michael's new apartment, I could get used to this.
Right.
Yeah.
He could live.
No more, pardon me.
He could live a pretty comfy life, but then he realizes, if I follow this, I will be miserable no matter how comfortable I am. Yeah,
because as we see in No More, it's the first time Jonathan understands some of the reasons why someone might want a different life and not just to move out of the apartment, because Michael was his former roommate. And the scenes in the new apartment are underscored by dreamlike classical music, and the dancing is ballet-esque, and the way Lin-Manuel Miranda shot it was, when you're in the apartment, you see full body shots, so it looks like a dance sequence out of an old MGM musical. Meanwhile, the scenes in the old apartment are shot in black and white with a rock score, and ends with a fantasy sequence where Jonathan pictures living there as a successful man wearing tuxedos, saying hello to Mr. Doorman, who looks like Captain Kangaroo, and he's in the elevator surrounded with babes, only to immediately transition to him in a crammed subway wearing faded clothes and looking absolutely miserable. But as you said, once he goes into the focus group, then he sees the strings attached to that sort of lifestyle. Yeah.
And it's not to say that he would be, happier. Let me say it this way. It's not that he's happy that he has to ride the subway or anything like that. In fact, that is...
Or that his power is being shut off and he can't pay his bills.
Right. And that is a source of suffering. It's just different. And going back to that idea of this movie not turning away from the suffering entailed, not just in following your dreams, but I think this is something, you're better able to talk about this, but the suffering entailed in creating art.
Yeah.
And, excuse me, I think if there's any point that I've taken away from existentialism, it's not the feeling per se of suffering or happiness or love that is the important point. The important point is your relationship to the feeling.
So, and how you deal with it.
In Jonathan's case, he is able to use his suffering, to bring it back to what you said, to write about what he knows. And I think that leads us towards the end of the film.
Yeah. So, louder than words. So, in my opinion, this is a great finale that asks some existential questions designed to make the audience mull over these thoughts as they leave the theater, which would make Brecht very proud, because Bertolt Brecht believed that the primary purpose of theater was to hold up a mirror to society, as Hamlet says, hold up the mirror, and to get people to question the world around them. So he really believed in theater, and specifically realism. And so Jonathan asks, why do we do things that hurt us? Why do we love people who treat us so miserably? Why does it take something horrible to happen for people to wake up? And Jonathan says, I don't have the answers. But he does say, you have to ignore everything people say and pay attention to what they do to understand how they feel about these questions and other issues. And so this musical is his action, and it also foreshadows the actions he'll try to take by writing Rent in the future. The reason I say try is because Rent is a piece, in my opinion, it's a piece of unfinished work, and I don't think what happened with it was the finished product that Jonathan had in mind, but that's for another episode. And when Jonathan blows out his birthday candles, he hopes that the actions he's trying to take with his work will speak volumes long after he's gone.
So, I mean, to those questions, right? If philosophy is good for anything, it should answer those questions.
You would hope so.
You would hope so, yes. And I guess if anyone wants to claim to answer those questions, it's existentialism. So I suppose I should say something, shouldn't I?
You're writing a book, aren't you?
I'm writing a book. I should have some answers. And the existentialists, do have some answers, however unsatisfying they may be.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things.
In the grand scheme of things. Although how satisfactory someone finds the answers, I guess depends on them. But what why do we get involved in things that we know will hurt us?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately the answer is because we find meaning in it. The feeling of pain for the existentialists should not deter us from following what we find meaningful. And oftentimes when you follow what is the most important thing to you, like we said before, sometimes that runs into conflict with other things that are important to you. And that's where making choices can be really difficult and really painful. But ultimately, that is what defines you. And the existentialists were, I guess you could say, unique in the sense that they did not like people, philosophers specifically, not acknowledging the pain that comes with following your heart. And someone wrote about Kierkegaard, and everyone has interesting things to say about Kierkegaard because he was a character.
Well, it's interesting that we're also talking about Kierkegaard in the context of Tick, Tick, Boom and choosing between those you love, because I remember in our Existentialism in Theater 101 episode, you talked about Kierkegaard and Regina Olsen.
Right, yes. Yeah. He very much made that choice between being a writer and being with the one he loves, and he chose being a writer, just like Jonathan.
He was still very upset about it, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were both upset. I mean,
yeah.
But I think the lesson to take away from it goes into what someone wrote about him. Someone said, Kierkegaard gave no consolidation. He gave What is this word?
Take your time.
Why am I having a brain fart?
He gave consolation.
Consolation. I don't know why
It's okay.
brain farted there, but it happens.
It happens, but we keep going. The show must go on.
He gave consolation not by covering up sorrow, but by first making one genuinely aware of it by bringing it to complete clarity.
Oh, absolutely, because when you bring suffering out into the open, that makes it easier to talk about and to actually try to work toward healing. That's why, in my opinion, whether it's with, the suffering of a country and stuff that's happening because we refuse to acknowledge our past, or whether it's suffering within a family due to generational trauma, or suffering within yourself, it is important to try to address it, because if you ignore it and you act like it doesn't exist, it's just going to fester in you, and it'll take effects in your life that you can visibly see results from, but it'll also affect your life in ways that you won't realize until later. And so the sooner you address it, then the less harm you'll cause to yourself and the ones around you, intentionally or unintentionally. And I think that person is very right what they said about Kierkegaard. When
we talk about pain and suffering, there are a few schools of thoughts. Schools of thoughts? School of thoughts. Thoughts.
Schools of thought. You had it right the first time. It's okay.
No, I added the S at the end of thought. I was like, why did I do that?
It's okay.
But someone that is not very liked in philosophical circles, not because he's dumb or anything, it's just that he's very, how should I say, intimidating.
Okay.
First of all, to read, but also because of his views.
So polarizing as well? Is that fair to say?
Polarizing is a good term.
Okay.
Schopenhauer.
Oh, yes. I think you mentioned him a couple episodes ago.
Yeah. In contrast to Neitzsche, Schopenhauer did not like life. We could say it that way.
That's a hell of a way to put it.
He said, the only thing that life has to offer us is that the good times don't stick and aren't as good as we ever remember.
Ooh.
The bad times stick and tend to be worse over time.
Wow, that is an outlook.
That is an outlook. And for him, for Schopenhauer, pain, suffering, that is kind of akin to man's original sin. Like it completely devalues life to the point that it's not even worth it. If I can remember the quote, I think he said something to the effect of, the costs don't outweigh the benefits. Or I should say, the cost outweigh the benefits.
Mm-hmm. We get what you mean, yeah.
Yeah. For Neitzsche, he had the exact opposite view. That it is the suffering that makes life worth living.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you survive it. And you do so because at the end, you find this so meaningful, and you find life so meaningful and what you do in it, that you are willing to go through suffering and whatever it entails. And he had this quote. I'm just pulling out quotes today,
That's fine.
Like a madman.
Go ahead.
He said, Neitzsche said,
Neitzsche.
I do not point to the evil and pain of existence with the finger of reproach, but rather entertain the hope that life may one day become more evil and more full of suffering than it has ever been.
I don't know if I agree with that part, because I think that's going a little bit overboard with it.
I think in context, and he's a provocative writer.
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is the man who said God is dead and we have killed him, so of course.
Right, and he doesn't mean that literally.
Oh, no. I know what he meant, yes.
And I suppose he doesn't mean this literally.
Yes.
But his point being, suffering is Nietzsche's way of saying life is worth it. The fact that you go through suffering means that, and you survive, means that, and in the grand metaphysical sense, life is worth it.
Yeah.
And you go on, and whatever happens, at the end of the day, you can look back and you can say, I lived my life, and I did the best I could, and sometimes that's all you need.
Which Jonathan and his friends did with the time they were given.
That is a very sobering point if you want to end on that.
Yeah, but it does give you something to think about. On that note, as always, thank you for listening to the latest. Oh, yes, wait.
By the way,
Aaron.
I am not pro-evil. No matter what
No,
Neitzsche
he's
quote,
not.
no matter what Neitzsche quote I pull out.
We are not
Sometimes you have to
pro-evil.
take in stride.
Yes. All right, so, as I was saying, on that note, as always, thank you for listening to another episode of Where is the Director? Aaron, it is always a pleasure to talk with you and to do these episodes with you.
Same.
Thanks. So, please let us know what you thought of this episode. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. I post the episodes on social media if you want to find them there or share them there. But if you enjoyed it, thank you for letting us know. And if you didn't, well, too bad, we're going to keep making these. But as always, thank you for listening to another episode of Where's the Director? And, alright, that's the end of the episode. Have a good one. See you for the next
Bye.
one. Bye.